Yo, y'all can hear me? Anyways, it is your boy King Ty Next here, back with another video, and today's video is going to be kind of special. Not really, but this is going to be the next part of the Spawn What If. That's basically it. Hold up. Spawn sat in a dark alley. He wasn't sure what to do after what happened over the past week. When he first touched Shoto Todoroki, he became aware of Endeavor's family life and all the dark secrets that came with it, while sharing his own recollection with the younger son of Endeavor in return. Later on, he encountered Tensei Ida, the older brother of Tenya Ida, only to be confronted by the latter, who was visiting his brother at that time. Spawn didn't want to have a fight, so he decided to restrain the brothers with his chains. He grabbed the younger Ida brother's face with his left hand before walking over the Tensei, whose face Spawn then placed his right hand on. He concentrated on practicing his empathic psychometry on the two of them. This ended up causing Izuku, as well as the two Ida brothers, to experience a touch telepathic three-way information swap, causing each one of them to experience the other two's respective recollection before Spawn let go of the two brothers and made us leave. He visited his mother and younger sister that night, while swiftly avoiding the authority and explaining what had happened. I know what you're thinking, and my answer is no. I'm not going to use the ability on the two of you. The reason for this being because I don't know the consequences of using this ability, and I don't want to hurt you guys, Izuku explained. Inko reassured her son that she was willing to take the risk for both his sake as well as her own. Makumo even added her own bit of input, stating that regardless of what they might say or think of it, she still wanted to understand what this was all about. Izuku sighed in defeat before he placed each of his hands on the mother and daughter duo while focusing his powers, resulting in the three of them now knowing about each other's collective memories and knowledge, before Spawn said farewell to the two Midoriya females and headed off. Well, Malbolgia, what do you think of the way I have managed to handle this power of mine? Well, I gotta admit, kid, you're probably the first one to use it in such a way. Izuku raised an eyebrow at this comment. What do you mean by the first? Izuku interrogated. What? Did you think you were the first and only Spawn? Before Izuku could answer the question, Malbolgia did it for him. Look, kid, you were never the first Spawn. There have been plenty of Hell Spawns throughout the centuries, but what makes you unique is that you are the first one of the entire Jumpverse as a whole. Jumpverse? Yes. The reality my realm and I was originally connected to was one beyond this multiverse you live in. Which Spawn before me was the most notable one? It was an African American man by the name Albert Simmons. He was the first Spawn to ever defeat and kill me. I lost everything because of him. But throughout the years, I was able to find a new realm that I planned to myself in. This obviously being your own, and slowly but surely I've been able to regain my strength. I'm still not in the same position as I used to be, but I'm getting there. Izuku mused on these new details. This changed everything about his perspective on life. After all, he basically got the confirmation that there was more life out there. There were alternate universes as well. Multiverses, actually. He couldn't believe it. He was jumping rooftops at the moment. Some police officers saw him and were trying to catch him. They were on his heel, but Izuku was starting to pick up the pace. They were beginning to get smaller in Izuku's eyes, but he wasn't about to slow down now. Unfortunately, he wasn't expecting for there to be someone standing around one of the rooftops he was jumping to. He didn't look where he was going and accidentally collided with a villain. I mean, not a villain, but a civilian. Hey! Watch where you're running, will ya? An angry voice yelled. Izuku began to apologize while picking himself up until he saw the face the voice belonged to. Was it really who he thought it was? Bakugo? Izuku asked. Yeah, that's my name, and who are you? How do you know my name, actually? The angry adult replied. Izuku stood up and took a good look at the now fully grown Bakugo. Izuku was actually taller than Bakugo now. The blonde was about 5'11" in height. He looked pretty rough though. He had a scraggly stubble of facial hair and it appeared as if he let himself go. He was wearing a suit and tie, although he wore it in a sloppy and baggy fashion. That was typical of Bakugo, but it looked like he gained quite a bit of weight. His face was pretty round, unlike 5 years ago. It was no longer sharp and angular. Despite the fact his suit was baggy, some parts seemed to constrict to his form, giving off the impression of a chubby man. There were bags under his eyes, and Izuku looked down to see he was holding a cigarette. You really let yourself go, Bakugo, Izuku whispered. Oi! Answer my question! How do you know my name? Bakugo yelled. I see. You don't recognize me in this form. I can't blame you, honestly. I mean, 5 years can't really change a person. Bakugo was confused. What are you blabbering about? Bakugo asked as he folded his arms. Maybe you'll recognize his nickname, Kachan. As soon as Bakugo heard that name, his eyes immediately widened in shock. There was only ever one person who called him by that name. Bakugo backed away in fear. Izuku began walking towards him, practically smelling his terror right now. What's the matter, Kanchan? You scared of little old Deku now? Izuku taunted. This was payback for all the years of torment he went through because of Bakugo. It felt good to just see his former bully fearful of him. Stay back. I don't want any trouble, Bakugo ordered. It's a bit too late for that, Bakugo. Izuku ran at Bakugo. Bakugo immediately turned and began sprinting away from Izuku, but he didn't last long. He was almost overweight and he hadn't worked out in years. His stamina, it was pretty trash, honestly. He tried using his explosion quake as a sort of propulsion in order to widen the distance, but he could barely get himself off the ground nowadays with this quake. After a minute of pursuit, Izuku made it to arm's reach of Bakugo. He was breathing heavily and began bending over in exhaustion. Izuku almost felt bad to see Bakugo in such a pitiful state. He grabbed Bakugo by the collar and lifted him up. He made Bakugo face him. Izuku took off his mask in order for the blonde to get a good look at his dismantled face. Just by the green curly hair alone, Bakugo was able to tell that this was indeed Izuku. The explosive teen began begging for his life. Are you like some kind of ghost looking for vengeance or something? Is this a dream? Is that just it? A really bad nightmare? I didn't kill him. I didn't kill him, right? Bakugo began talking to himself. Izuku watched as this happened and he only shook his head in disappointment. He began to grow impatient when Bakugo got into a state of muttering and snapped at him. Hey! This isn't a dream, or a ghost, or any of that stuff. This is the real deal here, and now that I found you, Bakugo, it's time to atone for your sins. Izuku walked over to the edge of the building with Bakugo still being held onto by his collar. Bakugo looked down at how high up they were and all the moving traffic of Japan. He didn't want to go out like this. Ever since Izuku died all those years ago, Bakugo couldn't live with himself knowing that he was the root cause behind all of it. All of Izuku's pain and what drove him to do what he did. That was why he quit on his dream of becoming a hero, the next symbol of peace. In Bakugo's mind, he didn't deserve to become a hero anymore. Sure, he still made it into UA, but not for the hero course. He decided to aim for their general course. He felt guilty still and decided that he would try his best to prevent another death like Izuku's own. Many people needed the help, as he would go on to find out. He signed up to become a worker that dealt with preventing others from ending their own lives. Or another word that we shall not use. And for once he could end up, and for once, I don't know where I went. And for once, he kind of felt like he was doing good in the world. Although, the image of Izuku's body on the floor would never escape his psyche. Probably part of the reason why he took up smoking, to cope. Now, here he was about to die to the person he thought died years ago. The irony was real here. Bakugo prayed to whatever force that was out there to save him from death. He didn't want to die here. He just wanted to at least make more of an impactful difference in the world, but that wouldn't be the case here. He closed his eyes and prepared to brace the impact. He felt Izuku let go of his collar and Bakugo began to scream as he fell. He was suddenly grounded again though. Bakugo opened his eyes to see Izuku holding his collar again. He was confused. He thought Izuku was going to kill him. That didn't appear to be the case anymore. Izuku hurled Bakugo back up to the floor of the rooftop and Bakugo landed on his butt. It hurt, but the blonde would admit he'd take a broken butt over what could have happened just a second ago. Why? Was all Bakugo asked. To simply put, death is too easy of a punishment for your atrocities, Bakugo. Izuku answered. He walked over to Bakugo and grabbed the boy's face. They ended up exchanging memories. Bakugo now knew Izuku's experiences throughout his life, all in the boy's shoes and vice versa. Bakugo looked over to Izuku. I'm sorry. Bakugo apologized. Sorry? For what? Izuku replied harshly. Everything. From how I treated you like an outcast to where I used you as a punching bag to even now. I'm extremely sorry for all that I've done. Everything I did back then was childish, but I've matured now. Izuku sighed. Look, Bakugo. I don't accept your apology. You just did too much to me back then that it's almost impossible to ever forgive you. But at least now no one will be driven to such an extent like myself because of you. I can tell that you've changed, or at least are trying to change. But like I said before, I can't accept your apology. Not now, but at the very least, keep the dream alive, Bakugo. dream to become the next #1 hero. For the both of us, considering we used to always talk about wanting to surpass the man himself only when you accomplish that goal and earn the title Symbol of Peace. Well, I consider actually forgiving you, Kacchan. Bye. Bakugo looked down at himself and grabbed his gut. He sighed. He wasn't sure if it was possible that he could ever become a hero again after all that happened. He let himself go throughout the last 5 years, and he was never part of UA's hero course, so he didn't know how intense it became since it converted to extending the courses all the way to college level. He wanted to give it a shot though. Izuku, interestingly enough, relit a bit of his passion in wanting to be a hero. Looking at Izuku's memories, he realized how horrible, how garbage of a person he was, how garbage of a person he used to be. The sports festival that was coming up soon. That was going to be happening in a couple of months from now, where everyone could prove their worth and have a chance at changing courses. Only the best of the best ever made it into the hero course, so Bakugo knew he had to get back in shape if he wanted any chance at accomplishing this new goal of his. He looked back at his cigarette and threw it off the building. He needed to quit smoking too. It was going to be tough, but maybe converting his aggravation to energy for working out would help him fight the addiction. He started off with doing a lot of cardio and mixing it in with his explosion quirk. He needed to lose the fat first, so we began running 4 kilometers a day in total. It was extremely exhausting, and Bakugo ended up feeling a lot of pain in his joints. He switched to using a bike a month in the process. He began shredding off a lot of weight and began eating smaller doses of food. He started getting compliments at work as well from others who were noticing his weight loss. It felt good, but he tried to not let their attention get to him. Never again. He eventually picked up the weights as well when he lost a decent amount of weight, around 20 pounds in the last 2 months. Or like 25 pounds actually, 25 to 30. He needed to start building up his muscles too. He practiced with his quirk for about an hour or 2 a day at Dagobah Beach. It was pretty much a junkyard that no one went to, so it was the perfect place for Bakugo to train. He kept up his studies though as well. He knew he wasn't the smartest, nor would he ever be. But he was within the top of the class, around top 5, so we needed to keep that up. He started keeping track of the news with what the media called Spawn, the hero course, and everything else in the news. He was starting to feel better about himself now. He was actually thankful for what Izuku told him that day on the rooftop. Gave him the motivation to become better than he had ever been before. Then, the USJ happened. Momo Yaoyorozu had only been released from the hospital 2 weeks ago, and she was already being thrust back into the art of combat. She honestly couldn't have thanked that individual enough back there. It was one of the few times she had ever felt so vulnerable after she joined the hero course. She went drinking with a couple of friends to celebrate a heroic victory in a combat simulation earlier that very night. She was pressured into it as she wouldn't often go drinking, but she let her guard down just that once, considering the fact that she was going to be around her friends. Something she failed to take into account though were all of them getting drunk. This one creepy dude was trying to hit on her. but she kept on telling him off. She made sure to monitor her consumption of the alcohol, but ended up having to go to the bathroom at one point. From there, she knew her drink was tampered with. There was some fizz to the drink, but she didn't think too much of it at the time. She regretted it immediately. The room was spinning and it felt like the place was getting larger every second. She was taken outside where some other men showed up with lustful looks on their faces. She tried defending herself, but she wasn't in the right mind at the time. She was struggling to keep her balance, and the guys kept trying to force themselves onto her. If it weren't for that green-eyed individual with moppy green hair, she didn't want to even think about it, to be honest. Once she was in the clear to go back to school, she was a bit more distant. It wasn't necessarily any of her friends' faults, but she just needed time to herself. She wouldn't get such an opportunity though, because that day they would be arriving at the USJ for rescue training. They'd been through those sort of exercises before, but they'd be facing off against practice villains. Well, that was a plan anyways. Things took a turn for the worse though as soon as they got there. A black and purple portal began to open up, and Kirishima pointed this out. He was thinking that these were the practice villains Aizawa was talking about on the bus, but judging from the professor's sudden shift in body posture, they realized that these guys weren't part of the schedule. The one who created the portal wasted no time to warp most of the students to different parts of the USJ. Momo was no exception. She found herself in a group with Jiro and Kaminari. She wasn't too fond of Kaminari simply because he was a pervert. Not the sort of closet pervert either, the type that most boys were that knew how to contain themselves. He was rather open with his pervertedness, but she had to give him some credit for the fact that he learned how to wield his quirk better over the years. He always mentioned wanting to have a lightning sword in the beginning years of UA, but he ended up going a step forward with that thought. Originally, he was planning on upgrading his costume to have some discs to aim his electricity, but he went against it, opting to go for his sword idea. He actually ended up investing in dual blades, which worked great for close combat, and you could still use them for mid to long range combat as well. The blades weren't really blades for more so just hilts that he could channel his electricity into forming electric constructs of blades. Imagine lightsabers, for example. If he channeled more electricity into them, he could end up making them larger or even creating lasers to attack his opponents with. He was competent enough in battle. Jiro was a similar case in which she could channel her quirk into her boots or wrist amplifiers, allowing her to create massive forms of vibration attacks, which could wreck the area around her. She was petite, but she probably held one of the strongest offensive quirks within their class. She wasn't one to be taken lightly. Momo was confident in the group that she was in. They were able to make quick work of the villains that were in their area. Unfortunately, not everyone was so lucky. Tsuyu Asui was one of those unfortunate people. She had a mutation quirk which made her resemble a frog and have some of the qualities of one as well. She would have flourished if she were put somewhere such as the flood zone. but it appeared as if these villains did their research as she found herself in the conflagration zone alongside Choto Todoroki, someone who primarily used the eyesight of their quirk. Suyu couldn't handle the intense heat due to the drawbacks the quirk gave her, causing her to collapse. She couldn't fight in these conditions. Todoroki was struggling here too and had to resort to using the fire side of his quirk. He was burning up afterwards but managed to drag himself and Suyu out of there, although she was in a critical condition. They were in there for a while after all. Ojiro found himself in the flood zone surrounded by villains. He simply wasn't able to escape here. He could try swimming out of there, but his clothes would weigh him down. He tried thinking of any other sort of way to escape, but they all ended up being fruitless in the end, as he was consumed by the tides from one of the villain's quirks. Momo's group managed to find their way back to the entrance after making quick work of the villains within their area. They were worried about the rest of their classmates considering all the different zones there were. Some could have played to their strengths, but Momo was highly doubtful about them being sent to an area where their quirks excelled. What everyone saw, though, shook them to their core. Their teacher, Aizawa, was getting his face bashed into the ground over and over again by this buff quirk user. There was something off about them, though. They had their brain exposed and the look in their eyes seemed distant. It didn't seem like Aizawa noticed their presence, though. Either that or he was actively ignoring them. He looked over to Ida. Ida, you're the fastest one here. Run and go get help. But, no, but Ida, go. Aizawa was bleeding heavily. He was almost unconscious. He was using most of the little energy he had left to give that order to Ida. The engine boy turned around and decided to make a run for it. The warp gate quirk user witnessed this action and tried to stop the young adult from getting away, but Kirishima came out of nowhere, clutching down on the little manifestation of Kurogiri's physical body. He tackled Kurogiri to the ground and Ochako was with him. She placed all 5 of her fingers on a mist's brace, causing him to float up. This gave Ida enough time to escape. Kurogiri managed to gain back control of his motion not too long later, and found his way back to Shigaraki. He informed the man-child of how one of the heroes in training managed to get away. This irked Shigaraki because of the fact this guy was most likely going to get more pro heroes from UA or something. They'd be screwed if they managed to do that. They needed to leave now, but before doing that, Shigaraki wanted to get some blood on his hands. He looked around and focused his attention on Aizawa. He was about to grab his neck, but a chain wrapped around Shigaraki's arm. He was confused. He looked up and turned his head to the direction of where the chain came from, and saw him. Yeah, I don't think so. As Zuko stated. Zuko yanked his chain and forced Shigaraki away from Aizawa. He was now facing an undead man known as Spawn. I was already scouting the area since I was feeling an intense amount of dark energy here. I ended up encountering Ingenium along the way, and he said he had no time to deal with me. It was an emergency back at the USJ, so I decided to peek my head in, and this is what I see. You and that behemoth over there got the most dark energy out of everyone here. Shigaraki placed his hand on the chain restraining him. It quickly began to rest, but Deku didn't think twice about what he needed to do. He turned his cape into an axe, which he used to chop off Shigaraki's arm, the one attempting to relinquish him from Izuku. Well, his intention was to chop off the overgrown child's arm, but something stopped that from happening. He ended up getting punched in the face by someone which had enough force to send him flying back. The chain that tethered Izuku and Shigaraki together was broken. Izuku realized this just a moment too late, though, as his back slammed against the wall. He gasped in pain, a pain that he wasn't all that familiar with ever since he first gained his new body. He pushed himself off of the wall and dusted himself off. The pain quickly subsided, but he'd be lying if he didn't say that it felt like a freight train hit him just now. He looked up at his new opponent. It was that other fellow who reeked of negative energy. Their appearance was strange, and looking at their eyes, it didn't even appear that they were truly alive. He supposed that may explain why their brain was also exposed. Zuko had no time to focus on small details though. He needed to fight. He gripped his axe even tighter now and charged at the abomination. He swung the axe at its arm, chopping it off. Shigaraki was in the background, whistling at the spectacle. Oh, I see you actually managed to give our Nomu an injury. Well, don't get cocky because look at what's happening now. Just as Shigaraki said that, then Nomu's arm began to regrow. As Zuko clicked his tongue. So, the Nomu also had regenerative abilities. Well, that made things a bit more complicated. He needed to slow down the Nomu's healing if he ever wanted a chance at taking him down. He decided to go ahead and use his fire breath in order to cauterize their wounds. Izuku took a step back. Shigaraki thought it was out of fear, which made him laugh even harder, but in actuality, Izuku just needed it for his next attack. He gathered up a large amount of air in his lungs before exhaling a stream of fire towards the Nomu. Shigaraki's eyes widened seeing this. Fire breath? He thought this guy had some sort of super strength quirk or something. The blazing effect left the Nomu dazed and fried. They weren't completely out of battle though. They were healing, albeit at a slower rate than before. Izuku went further and tried to chop off their head, but the Nomu still managed to grab his axe. They roared at Izuku before trying to break the item. It didn't really work, but they still had enough strength to take control of Izuku's axe. They pulled it away from him and tried throwing the weapon back at Izuku. Izuku dodged and used one of his chains in order to grab the weapon. Okay. Axes. So they aren't going to work too well on this guy, so... How about this? Izuku slammed his hand on the ground after the Nomu fully healed and headbutted him. He had to maneuver himself in order to land on his feet. He had to use the hand for extra assistance, a better grip on the ground. He felt a weird sensation from the earth though. It was as if it was calling to him. He knew what to do. The Nomu tried going in for another attack, but something grabbed their leg. They didn't bother even looking down. They tried to keep running towards Izuku in order to give him another punch to the face, but whatever was grabbing them held a tight grip. Izuku ended up using some of his necroplasmic energy in order to affect the ground he stood above. He had the earth wrap around the Nomu's leg in order to get the thing to hold still for a little. Izuku smirked under his mask. Nice. He manipulated the earth a little more and had it envelop the Nomu. He knew that wasn't going to hold the Nomu for long, but he was getting himself prepared. He could hear the Nomu pounding down on the wall of earth as Izuku trapped them in. It was slowly but surely beginning to crack. Izuku was charging a large-scale attack, enough to incinerate the Nomu in its entirety, but Melbogia gave him a useful piece of information. Now, why would you do that? Why use up so much of your limited supply of necroplasm when you could absorb that negative energy from the Nomu now that they're contained? What? You already have the sensory abilities, so now you just need to feed upon it. That's something all Hellspawn have been able to do over the years in order to replenish their energy. I'm only telling you this because you are the first of my Hellspawn in this universe. Interesting. Izuku focused on the energy that the Nomu was emitting and attempted to feed upon it. He could feel his muscles begin to bulge and his eyes glow. An immense amount of hate and fear was consumed by Izuku. It was like an ecstasy to him. His mask opened up and revealed his wide, toothy smile. His teeth were jagged. You could compare them to that of an anglerfish. He grew claws as well. He roared at the Nomu when they broke out of their restraints. The Nomu went ahead and tried to attack Izuku, but Izuku was far stronger than he was before. He was able to beat down on them now. The two were going blow for blow. All anyone could do now was watch in awe. Shigaraki was beginning to lose his cool as he saw that Izuku was beginning to overwhelm the Nomu. For every punch the experiment gave, Izuku gave him 10 more. Kurogiri tried to use his portals in order to give the Nomu an edge in the battle, but that hardly worked as Izuku suddenly created portals of his own. Izuku was consuming more negative energy now from all over the USJ. There were several villains there, and it was as if he was a kid at the candy shop. He could afford to be reckless here with his powers. He was replenishing his necroplasmic energy more than the amount he was burning. He was beginning to grow horns as well, but he didn't notice those effects taking place anymore. The Nomu screamed in pain as Izuku grabbed their head and released a large amount of raw necroplasmic energy. It had a burning effect on the Nomu, deteriorating their body. Izuku uses empathic retrocognition at the last moment though, just to see what exactly happened to this thing for them to have been brought to such a state. What he saw shook him to his core. He didn't have time to dwell on this for long though, as the heroes arrived right after he finished off the Nomu. Izuku was exhausted after his fight with the Nomu. He never had to try so hard until today, and he wasn't in the mood to even bother trying to fight All Might. He didn't resist any form of arrest, although some of the students tried to defend him, explaining how he practically protected all of them. He fought off the Nomu for crying out loud. He took down the strongest villain within the whole USJ. Most of them were able to defend themselves against the weaker villains, although they weren't able to account for everyone. All Might didn't necessarily want to arrest Spawn as he was keeping up with their activities. He didn't seem to be as bad of a guy as the media tried to depict him as. Unfortunately, he was still a vigilante, and he had to be arrested. Some time had passed with Izuku being in solitary confinement. He had some time to reflect on his actions now back there. To be honest, he was not pleased with himself over what he was forced to do back at the USJ. His cellar opened up and he was suddenly confronted by the heroes that were part of the school faculty. He saw a bit of an opportunity here, so he decided to use the court canceling underground hero himself, Eraserhead, as a hostage like bargaining chip by wrapping him up in his cape, which held him up tightly. He made sure to apologize to him in advance for what he was about to do. This caused his fellow faculty members, Midnight and Present Mike, to become furious. Before the former decided to blindly rush over to the demonic vigilante in rage, followed by a concerned Present Mike. They were unfortunately cut off by getting wrapped up in Spawn's chains before Spawn himself decided to walk over to the two ensnared pro hero teachers. He sighed. Look, I know that I tried to point out that I just want to be left alone in the past, but I just could not stand by as innocent lives were at stake. I can understand that you did not like me taking your friend and colleague hostage. Izuku tried to explain. Hold on. How can you be certain that either of us consider him to be just as much of a friend as he is a colleague? Mike interrupted. Spawn hummed for a second in thinking regarding the question. I would say the fact that your sentimentality got the better of you two, especially the sister-like friend of yours, Present Mike, speaks all for itself. Midnight spoke up this time. We already lost one of ours. We already lost one, okay? I didn't want another one to be lost as well. Unlike most of my predecessors, I lacked the heart to cross the forbidden border. President Mike rose an eye at this. Wait, so does that mean not only did you have no intention of killing Eraserhead, but you also felt reluctant in using him like this? I have a non-lethal weapon that can be just as dangerous and frightening as any lethal one. Do you want me to take away your ability to express apathy just so that you can leave me alone? When I used it on the Nomu, you could almost say that it was thanking me. They were trapped in a body they had no free will over. All they wanted at that moment was to be set free from this curse that plagued them every day as they were forced to listen to the orders of their captors. I saw all their memories involving the gruesome experiments they ended up going through. You do realize that mercy kill is still considered murder, right? It doesn't count if they were already dead. The will of the original person's body was still there even after death. I managed to pull that out and see just what they were like before and how they mutated into such a state, Izuku explained. I still don't understand this whole memory swap thing, Midnight stated. How about I show you instead? The two pro heroes looked at each other briefly before turning their heads to face Spawn, giving a synchronized nod in response, albeit with some hesitance. Spawn then placed each of his hands on them, respectively, before focusing on his empathic retrocognition, which caused him to experience a new aspect that he did not take into account, namely that his cloak-like mantle would be used, it could be used to perform retrocognition as well, which caused Izuku and the two pro heroes to experience neither a two-way nor a three-way variety of the touch telepathic information swap, but rather a four-way version instead, meaning that Shoto Aizawa was also participating in this procedure, completely reluctantly though. Once the procedure was done, Spawn had his cape let go of Eraserhead, as Spawn himself removed his hands in a calm and collected manner. The chains then released the two other pro heroes. Any thoughts? Izuku asked. I genuinely don't know how to respond. We'll have to inform Nezu about everything, Midnight said. Spawn nodded slowly before bowing his head. The three UA teachers left Izuku to his own devices while he was left in solitude. Izuku didn't know how much time passed before the door opened again. He was confused when he didn't see anybody at the door though. Down here! He looked down to see the one who was talking. He was surprised to find out that Nezu, the Chancellor of UA University, was in fact a sort of rodent who could talk. They talked to each other for a little bit, beginning to gain an understanding for each other. They were able to come to an agreement of the sorts afterwards. They were only a couple days before UA Sports Festival, and the focus was on Momo now. Momo and her mother sat inside their limousine's passenger area, accompanied by Shoto Todoroki and Tamaki Amajiki. They were on their way to visit the Midoriyas, whom Momo and her mother planned on letting live inside the Yaoyorozu family estate. Nezu was made aware of the relationship between the families by Izuku, and an idea popped up in his mind at the time. He informed Yaoyorozu of the situation, and she didn't think twice about what needed to be done. All she asked for was the address, and she texted her mother the information. She wasn't planning on having others join her, though. Care to explain why you guys felt the need to come along? Momo asked. I only came along for the sake of assisting you, Momo, Shoto stated. And what about you, Tamaki? Nezu requested for me to tag along as another piece of protection in case there were any villains around the area. It would make the interaction much smoother. Oh? How so? Momo questioned. Simple, really. The Midoriyas would know they have a greater amount of protection, and they can move into a larger home where they could be watched better. Have heroes be vigilant over them, as they would probably be aware that Spawn will develop a greater amount of foes over time. Especially now with the fact he says he'll work with UA and the rest of the heroes as a sort of partner. Yo, what's going on, Titan Clan? It is your boy King Titan X here, back with another video. This video is going to be special because of the fact that this is going to be the finale of the Spawn series. Now, in the last part, we basically left off on Izuku being arrested by the UA staff willingly this time around, and they would basically be interrogating him. Although what ended up happening in the process is that they would end up making a deal with Izuku. This deal would be that he would actually be working alongside UA in exchange for the protection of his family members. The main family members this time around being, well, Inko and his little sister. His little sister Yamakumo. I believe that's her name. I honestly forgot. But while this is going on though, something else will be happening in the background, the shadows you could say. You see, this stunt that Izuku pulled off at the USJ would not go unnoticed by the likes of Shigaraki and All For One. All For One would have asked how the USJ went, and Shigaraki would have stated that it was pretty terrible, to be honest, because of the fact that this strange cloaked figure that went by the name Spawn just appeared out of nowhere and started fighting the Nomu. All For One would grow curious about this person, someone that wasn't All Might, that was actually fighting the Nomu. At first he was expecting that they were going to lose tremendously, horribly, but Shigaraki actually told him the opposite. As a matter of fact, this guy just seemed to be growing stronger as the battle progressed. This really interested All For One, especially when Shigaraki ended up mentioning how he started growing horns from out of nowhere, and on top of that he was even turning his cloak into an axe. He was gaining muscle mass, he was becoming larger than before, he was even shooting flames at the guy. On top of that, he was even able to control the earth for some time as well. All of these different abilities he was showcasing, even teleportation and portal creation. At first, Shigaraki only knew about one person being able to create portals, and that was, well, Kurogiri, the warp gate master. But, well, apparently there was a new person in town that could do the same thing, and he did it quite lethally as well. He didn't really understand how this worked. All For One was kind of interested in Izuku as well. He wanted to know more about this kid, wanted to learn more about this Spawn person, you could say. He didn't necessarily know his actual name at the time, but he would get that information soon enough. No matter how much UA would try and hide this information about the existence of Izuku, no matter how much he tried, he would always get this sort of information. He had moles within UA, moles that were well hidden. They would never be discovered by the staff at UA, not easily at the very least. It would require some of the smartest minds to really try and decode who was actually the UA traitor. But while this would be going on, another thing would be happening. The sports festival. You see, even with the USJ happening, UA would still try to save face and have the sports festival still continue. In this timeline, Izuku would not actually participate, simply because of the fact that he was not a UA student, and they didn't want people to get the wrong idea by having a well-known vigilante just appear on the screens, on their TV screens, have heroes from all across Japan watching a vigilante perform in the sports festival. They simply could not allow that to happen. But while this would be taking place, Izuku would actually be with Tensei Ida, otherwise known as Ingenium. He would he would actually be patrolling the streets and getting some updates about the sports festival. Apparently, Bakugo would have actually been participating in the sports festival as well. He was, well, part of the general course, but in the sports festival, he was going to actually be aiming for number one here. He was going to make it into the hero course. He would be changing his life around here. This was all because of Izuku's wishes for him. He wanted to genuinely become a better person, and he wanted to save people at the same time. Izuku relit that candle. He relit that fire in Bakugo's heart. His drive to become a hero was back. Now, of course, someone else would be giving the speech at the sports festival. Kirishima, to be specific. When it came on to the speech, it was pretty lackluster. It was okay, for the most part. Bakugo wouldn't really think much about it. He would just be thinking about everything that brought him here. The obstacle course, though. This is where things will be probably one of the most interesting things of this story for Bakugo. Bakugo would have to face off against many other students, but after getting readjusted to his quirk, he would actually have some leverage against most of these students. Most of these students had subpar quirks. Bakugo actually had a quirk that could have gotten him into the hero course a lot earlier if he had wished to actually be part of it. If he had actually still continued to train when he was younger and all of these sort of things, he would have made it into UA if it went for the trauma he had after, well, the death of Izuku all those years ago. It still pained him that he was such an awful person back then. He had grown up so much from there. He was no longer a bully. He was genuinely trying to be a better person, trying to really get people's minds out of these depressing areas in their life. He knew that they would be going through some things in their lives that they just felt like ending it all, and he just would not allow these people to just let their lives go like that. They had so much to live for. They could be able to do so much things in this world if they really desired to do so. Bakugo becoming a hero would be able to show them even more that despite what may have been their backstories, they could always change everything around. They could genuinely become better people. They could genuinely change everything about their lives to where it's not as depressing. They could make a difference in this world. Bakugo would have so much reason to actually become a hero here. But while at the sports festival, he would realize pretty soon that his stamina was not the best. He would run out of gas pretty quickly while using his quirk. Sure, he could probably get through the robots pretty well, but when it came on to flying and all those sort of things, that took up a lot of his energy. He would usually save that for, well, he would actually end up saving the flying part of his quirk for the tightrope. He would go through the tightrope by actually flying all the way across and then landing on a minefield. He would have to recuperate for a little bit, trying to regain his breath because, well, once again, his stamina is not the best here. It's his main limiting factor. He would have to build up that sort of energy back. But Todoroki would actually be the one in the lead here. Some other people would actually begin to take over Bakugo's spot. Bakugo would actually be in 5th place in this time. He wouldn't have made it into like the top 3 or anything, but top 5 was still pretty good. Bakugo would be aiming for 1st though in the cavalry battle. In the cavalry battle, Todoroki actually won 1st place. With him winning 1st place, of course, he would have gotten the 10 million points. His team would basically be running around trying to grab other headbands and keep the 10 million headbands secure at the same time. Bakugo wouldn't have been... he would have basically been going for Todoroki. He knew that if he got the 10 million head points, it would basically end up with him being a shoe-in for the next part of the tournament. Tournament I should say. You already know what I'm talking about. Basically, the last part of the sports festival would be the tournament. If Bakugo was able to get the 10 million hit points, that would mean he would be easily able to get into the tournament brackets. He would be a shoo-in for that portion of the sports festival, and really prove that he was worthy of being in the hero course. Izuku would just be watching Bakugo perform in the cavalry battle. He would see his tactical skills taking place here. Izuku would smile a little bit. He would smile a little bit. It would basically be a little smirk, and he would be kind of impressed before he would be leaving to patrol Hosu City with Ingenium. They wouldn't really like each other, obviously for, their past interactions, but they wouldn't let that get the best of them. They wouldn't let that take over, because, they didn't really have much of a choice in this matter. They really didn't have much of a choice in the matter. They were basically put into this duo thanks to the hero committee. Basically, the Public Safety Hero Commission. They would have specifically assigned these two to Hosu City. And honestly, there wouldn't be too much happening. They would just be going through the regular checkups with everybody, stopping a few crimes here and there, until their encounter with Stain. When they encountered Stain would immediately try and attack Tensei Ida. He would try and attack Ingenium, thinking that he was a fake hero. He saw the man as a fake hero and would, just try and slash at him, but Izuku would have put a stop to that relatively quickly. He would actually just grab onto his katanas and break them right then and there. Stain would have actually been in shock. He would have been in some shock, but actually grab a couple of his daggers and try to throw them at Izuku, now focusing his attention on Spawn. He would try and attack Izuku, but all of his attacks would be fruitless in the end because most of them would not be able to pierce his skin. As a matter of fact, everything that tried to collide with him, it would just break on contact. Stain would be wondering, what is this guy made of? This must be a joke. Does he have like some sort of hardening quirk? If that's the case, then it's a bit of a bad situation, but at the same time there's bound to be some sort of weak spot, some sort of Achilles heel with this quirk of his. He wouldn't necessarily know that Izuku has no quirk. He has something completely different here. He would try and continue to attack Izuku, but Izuku would just block most of his attacks and just end up wrapping the hero killer up in his chains. This would quickly immobilize Stain, and Tensei would end up taking out some quick immobilizing handcuffs. He would wrap them around, well, Stain's hands. He would wrap them around, he would basically handcuff Stain, and basically Azuku would release the chains. He would release the chains and he would immediately be sent to prison. He would be arrested, but he would be taken to prison by the police officers who were quick to arrive on the scene, and Stain's message would never spread. There would be no new recruits for the League of Villains in this timeline. Back at the sports festival though, Bakugo would end up actually not necessarily be able to take home the 10 million hit point band, but managed to actually get second place here. Pretty much like usual, like similar to the original timeline as well. But Bakugo would actually be facing Todoroki. He wouldn't have had to really deal with Shinso. More so that he would have actually just kept his mouth shut the whole time. He already knew how to keep his emotions in check now. He would have kept his emotions in check the whole time and actually just walk up to Shinso, blast him in the face with a pretty big explosion, and it would send him flying outside of the ring. Bakugo would have said that he has already went through some pain in his life. Anything that Shinso would try to say to him wouldn't really matter because he's gone through far worse in his life. Nothing that Shinso could say would really hurt him. He would end up facing Todoroki, and the two boys would have a bit of a challenge. Todoroki would be surprised at the actual strength of Bakugo's explosions, but he still would never use his fire side. He would never use his fire throughout the whole match. Todoroki was not distracted here either, and in the end Todoroki would win. But Bakugo would actually be considered for a seat in the hero course after everything that he had done. He had already proved his worth here. And Aizawa was genuinely interested in him and Shinso. These two would actually make great additions to well, his class. He was really considering what he was going to do with these two. But well, Bakugo, since he was able to make it so far into the sports festival and they had some room here, well, Bakugo would actually be sent to Aizawa's class. He would actually transfer courses and everyone would be introduced to Bakugo after the sports festival. Nothing much would really happen in the Hosu arc until the Nomu attack, of course. But that would be for another time, basically. For the meanwhile though, Bakugo would just be getting himself situated with the rest of the class, and it would just so happen that this would also be the very day that, well, Midnight would be appearing to the class, basically here to, well, get everybody's names, their hero names, in order. They weren't necessarily sure if these were going to be permanent though. So that's why she wanted them to take extra care when it came on to them picking out their hero names. Some of the hero names would be a bit dumb, while others were simple. Then Bakugo's name would be brought up. Bakugo would have gone up onto the podium and revealed his hero name to everyone. It would actually be Kachan, because of everything that he had gone through with Izuku in this timeline. Izuku was the whole reason for why he was going to become a hero once again. He was the reason why he had pushed himself to actually strive further this time around. Izuku was the reason for why he was able to get this far, and with everything taken into account here, Izuku was basically his whole reason for living again. Izuku was genuinely the greatest thing to ever happen in his life once again. He was the thing to end it, and he was the thing to really turn his life around, to really make him into a likable person, a respectable person, to really say the least. He despised his older self, and this was also the reason why he took on the name Kacchan, the explosive hero Kacchan. Everyone would be a bit confused at first, but Bakugo would explain that this name held a very deep meaning to him. He would explain to them how a friend was basically able to convince him to become a hero once again, and this friend of his was why he was able to get this far in the very first place. He had to thank him for everything, and he would admit to have even being a jerk a couple of years ago as well. A very unlikable person. They probably wouldn't have liked him either. He was never as calm and collected as he usually is with the rest of the class now. Sure, he may have some outbursts. He would yell from time to time, but that's usually when he was cranky, when he didn't have his smoke of the day or something. Everyone would understand, and although they didn't necessarily know this Bakugo all that well just yet, they would accept him. They would accept the name, and everything would just continue from there on. Nothing much happens in the Hosu arc. Sure, there would be a Nomu attack, but Izuku would actually be there to burn through many of them, encase others in shells of earth, which would also immobilize them. People would actually be witnessing Izuku's actions, and some would, of course, be quite wary of the man. After all, he's literally like a giant in Japan. He's like over 6 feet tall, he's full of muscle. He's filled to the brim with muscle, and his face is basically decayed. He has a very disfigured face, you could say. Many would not want to see him without his mask on, and even when he does have his mask on, he's still quite intimidating. He looks quite scary, to be honest. Many would run away in fear of him, but some would actually thank him for his work. Izuku would be commended for his contribution in the end. Ida would have never actually went with Manuel in this timeline. He would have been with his brother. He would have actually been interning with his brother in this timeline. After all, well, Tensei was never injured in this timeline. He would have actually been saved by Izuku, and Stain is no longer a threat in this timeline. Izuku would have been commended, but All Might would be one of the heroes to be wary of Izuku's powers. Izuku, after all, did show that he has multiple powers, and this claim about having some relation to this demon of the sorts, yeah, he wasn't really buying it, to be honest. He had a feeling that All For One had some role to play with this character. He had some understandable suspicion, but he would be proven wrong eventually. Heroes like Night Eye would of course also be hesitant, but willing to give the boy a chance. He knew that he would be a great asset to have after all. He saw what he did at Hosu City, basically. He saw what Izuku was able to do at Hosu City, and he also heard what Izuku did at the USJ as well. On top of that, he heard what this kid was able to do against people like Todoroki, one of the strongest members of the hero course, and a hero in training after all. This young adult was going to go far if he actually continued to move up. If he continued to go along the same path as he is right now, he would prove to be one of the greatest assets to Hero Society in general. He had high hopes for this kid. That's all you need to know. Final exams would happen, and Izuku would end up being recruited by Night Eye during this time to do some patrolling. Night Eye wouldn't necessarily tell him about the Yakuzas and his suspicions about them. Not just yet. No. But Izuku would end up sensing the negative emotions while patrolling the streets. He would stop a couple of crimes under the consent of Night Eye. Everything he could end up blaming Night Eye for in the very end. If the heroes tried to stop him saying that he was doing vigilante work once again, he would basically be able to say that he was under the guide of Night Eye. He would even be willing to call him up if they really needed further proof. He'd bump into a little girl with long white hair and a small horn around their forehead though, while he was patrolling. While he was stopping those couple of crimes and everything, he would look down at the little girl and sense their emotional state. He wondered why they were wearing bandages as well. He would actually touch her forehead and read her mind. He'd see all of her memories and immediately snatch her up in his arms, refusing to let go of her. Eri, she didn't even want to be let go either. She could feel the more gentle sort of hug he was giving her, this sort of embrace that he was giving her. It was unlike anything she'd ever felt before. Izuku would refuse to let go of her and teleport away with her. He would have created a portal and stepped through it. He would leave the scene right when Overhaul was about to catch her. He would have been confused seeing this and be angry as well. Izuku would actually be able to teleport back to Night Eye's agency with the little girl in his hand, and before Night Eye could have any sort of questions, he would immediately transfer the memories into his mind. Night Eye would simply say that, very well then. He would still try and get some more information to incriminate Overhaul. After all, it would end up being his word against Overhaul's at the very end if he didn't get more substantial evidence to really incriminate Overhaul. But for now, the girl would be kept within his custody. He would be kept in Night Eye's custody, and when it came on to Overhaul, he would basically be sending out search parties. He would now know where to look for more information. And when it came on to the little girl, he would also be trying to get some therapists for her. After all, she had gone through a lot of trauma as she was growing up, and she probably was still going through some nightmares as they were speaking. Izuku would leave and meet up with Momo. She would be telling him everything that had been going on, and she would even inform him about the fact that his mother and sister were now at the Yaoyorozu's and how their final exams went. Bakugo was actually able to do fairly well in the final exams, facing off against Ectoplasm, and Izuku would have been kind of proud of Bakugo in this version. He wouldn't necessarily like him or anything, but he'd be proud of the fact that he was actually reforming himself. He was actually making even more of a difference here. He was really trying to become a hero, and not just for some petty reasons either. It was so that he could really pay a debt to Izuku. He was repaying his debt. He was becoming a hero, like he had always dreamed to be. He was living out the dream for both of them. Izuku, hearing that his mother and sister were at the Yaoyorozu household, he would obviously feel, pretty happy. He would feel that they were in good hands, but at the back of his mind, he would hear Malbogia's voice, telling him to still be hesitant. Be afraid of trust. Do not trust everybody here. Don't get too comfortable here. That's basically all he's saying, because he knows how things go. When you get too comfortable, that's when life likes to throw a curveball at you. When you get too comfortable, that's when life becomes an absolute hell. Little would Izuku know, though, it would be that all for one, he would actually be plotting against him the whole time. He would have actually ended up getting in contact with the Yakuzas. He didn't necessarily have a full team just yet, but by getting in contact with the Yakuzas and showing his sort of influence over the years, alongside the Nomu that he had in his possession as well, they would end up making a sort of alliance, you could say. This alliance would include them basically working together for the forest training arc. You could say basically they would be going up to the mountains and causing some panic, causing quite a bit of commotion. They would basically also be trying to sniff out the one known as Spawn. They would be trying to get the attention of Spawn all throughout this time, and Overhaul would also be informed of the fact that his parents, his mother and sister, were actually at the Yaoyorozu household. So it would basically be that Overhaul would be sent to kill those two, and all for one, he would be dealing with everything else. He would be dealing with All Might. He would be dealing with the students. He would basically be dealing with just slaughtering as many students as possible during this training that they were supposed to be having. All thanks to the UA traitor. All of this information being gathered, and with everything being just sent to the palm of his hand, really. Everything was now in his palm. He had everything in his palm, and he would just be laughing the whole time. Things would just be a mess the whole time at the, Forest Lodge. Ever since the first day, things were a mess, but once they were doing a challenge of the brave, challenge of the weak, challenge, this sort of challenge, they were they were basically meant to go up against some of their classmates and basically, well, try and scare each other. It was meant to be a fun activity until there was a bunch of commotion. A bunch of trees just started falling down, and All for One would have actually sent out for some help, even more help from the Yakuzas and other randos as well, other random villains. He would actually be able to get the likes of Muscular, Dobby, and that's pretty much about it. Those were the main ones that he was able to get alongside Moonfish. He was basically able to get their cooperation in this, and on top of that, he would also be able to get a bunch of other random villains that he frankly did not care too much about. They were just pawns in the grand scheme of things, because they would all just be bowing down before All for One at the very end of this. All for One would have gathered everyone, and the forest would be set on fire. Kota would actually die here because there would be no one to actually protect him from Muscular. It would also be a slaughter for many of the students as well. The only students that are really surviving here are, well, not much. Actually, I would say that a good portion would still survive. It would mainly be the weaker ones of the classes that really died. They wouldn't have been strong enough to really face off against Muscular, even with the couple of more years they had on themselves. This didn't necessarily mean that they had a better chance against Muscular. No, Muscular was still strong. Muscular still trained for 5 more years. He still had time to train himself, even if he had to do it in secret, even if he had to find other ways to really think of how to use his quirk. He would have ended up even sparring with some of the Nomus beforehand, just really getting his muscles back into shape, so that he would be even more of a threat here. He was just going on a mass genocide. He was killing students left and right. The main ones that were surviving here were Momo, Todoroki, Uraraka, Bakugo. Those sort of students, they would be the ones to survive. People like Sugar Rush, they stood no chance. Oh no, I'm sorry, honey. Azuku would have heard about all of this and teleported immediately to their location. He would have made quick work of most of the villains, but people like Muscular, they were kind of tricky. But he realized that trying to spare these guys, it would be fruitless. It would basically be too much effort right now, and it would be too time consuming. So he basically offed these guys as well. He would have killed Muscular, he would have killed Moonfish, he wouldn't have necessarily killed Dobby, but he would have ripped off one of his arms, which would have drastically decreased his effectiveness in battle. He would have been screaming in pain. He would have been screaming blood-curdling screams. He would have been yelling bloody murder, all of this stuff, until he actually had to face getting teleported away by Kurogiri. Kurogiri would actually teleport him to their master's lair. Well, he would actually teleport him to Overhaul. He would actually teleport him to Overhaul, where he would have to face a man. This man would show would actually show his mother and his sister. Overhaul would just have a wicked grin on his face, informing Izuku of the fact that he basically stole something of value to him. He basically took away something that was precious to him and his goals. So now he would have to watch as he did the same to his mother and sister. Izuku was confused at first until he saw Overhaul take off one of his gloves and touch his mother's head, causing it to explode on contact. Izuku was livid as soon as he saw this. He immediately sent his chains at Overhaul and dragged him towards himself. He would have punched Overhaul in the face with so much strength that it actually broke his jaw. He would have tried to send some fire at Overhaul, but Overhaul would actually try and touch Izuku. Izuku would have actually felt something try and, well, take over, try and make his body explode, but he would try and keep everything in contact. He did have a healing factor after all. He could control his body composition and everything along those lines. It would be like a tingling feeling to him. It would feel like his body is constantly on the verge of exploding, but he would be trying to take down Overhaul. He would have actually ripped Overhaul to shreds, but unfortunately his sister had to see all of this. She was traumatized as well. She did not know how to react. She wanted to scream, but no sound was coming out of her mouth. She just fainted after seeing what she saw. Izuku would have teleported back. He would have actually teleported his sister away from the scene and to Night Eye's custody. He trusted Night Eye to take care of her for right now. He had to attend to the others. He would have actually teleported away, and although it was painful, he would have had to deal with the fact that his body was basically, how should I say it? Basically atomizing itself and reforming itself every time he teleported. It hurt every single time, but it made for some convenience. He had to do it if he really wanted to save as many people as he could. He would be trying. He would try and fight as many of the villains. He would try and save as many people, but he would realize that not everybody would be savable here. He would have so much blood on his hands at the very end, but he would manage to save just a couple of people. Just a couple of people. It was better than nothing. In his mindscape, he still regretted the fact that he couldn't be in the same place all at once. He would realize this and he would just choke up. He would start to cry and punch himself. He would beat on himself because of the fact that he was unable to make it in time to stop all of this from happening. Not everyone would blame him though. No one would actually blame him in the end though. Although he now needed to know who was the culprit behind all of this. He demanded to know, and his wish would be granted actually. He would actually be introduced to All For One not too long later. All For One would actually appear at the Forest Lodge. He would just laugh at the scene, mentioning how this is what happens when you mess with All For One. All For One would introduce himself as well, All For One, and bring up how everything was just going according to plan. He must have felt quite broken right now. Everyone here would just feel the amount of bloodlust coming off of All For One, and really, they would just start to buckle up. No one would have expected for such a person to exist. All For One would have been using multiple quirks against Izuku. Izuku would have had to face off against All For One, and you would realize quickly that this guy was no joke. He would have to push himself beyond his limits. He would have to push himself beyond the limits he'd ever had to go through. He would absorb the negative energy, the negative emotions, the negativity of everyone here, and just use it to fill up his energy, cause him to go through a transformation, just like Shigaraki had stated. And he would witness the horns, he would witness wings actually form as well. He would witness Izuku grow to a larger stature. His muscles would become much more detailed here. He would be now fighting All For One with enhanced speeds and strength. He would go for mainly punches. He would be ripping him to shreds. He would be punching All For One over and over again. He would be hammering him into the ground. All For One was not expecting this. He would try and get Izuku off of him, but Izuku would end up using green flames against him. He would send energy spheres at the man. He would be throwing everything at All For One, everything that he had in his arsenal. He would use that against All For One. He would even use his axe. He would turn his cloak into an axe and shoot at All For One. All For One would just be trying to block everything, try and get away from Izuku, but Izuku, he refused to really back down here. Every single moment it seemed like Izuku's strength was just doubling over and over. What was this kid? All For One was trying to figure this out. He never thought that he would ever have to face somebody stronger than All Might, but this kid was proving to be quite the troublesome pest. He couldn't even get a hit in anymore. Izuku was just that strong and fast. It was ridiculous in the end. But All For One would realize soon that this was all fruitless. He was never going to win. He had signed this fate from the very beginning. He had really signed a deal with the devil here. And this is how I will end it. All For One would have died here. All Might would have witnessed this, and he wouldn't have anything to say. He would have just accepted it and reveal his sorry state to Izuku. He had already retired from a while ago, but here now he will be seeing everything. He will be seeing everything from this man and realize how pathetic All Might really was. He would realize this, but not really even care at this point. He just wanted to go home. He would have to reform Hero Society, but for now, he just wanted to rest. He was tired. He was tired of it all. He didn't want anyone to go through such tragedies again, which was why in the upcoming years he would actually apply for a hero license. He would actually pass, and he would actually become a full-fledged hero, climbing up the ranks and really showing people that these guys were not to be messed with any longer. He was basically going to show that this is a new generation of heroes, and with this being said, he had no problems killing. After all, it just seemed better to just kill off some of these villains instead of just letting them live. After all, letting a villain live was what was the reason why his mother died, on top of many others. All because he let some villains live. And the crime rates were drastically lower with Izuku in position here. Bakugo would have been his right-hand man at the very end of this, and they would have climbed to the very top. Bakugo would have been like around second or third place, constantly swapping in and out with Todoroki. Todoroki would have just kept to his ice though, until Izuku told him to use his fire as well. He refused to let some civilians die just because of his pettiness, just because of the fact that he had some daddy issues in the past. Think about the greater picture here. This is what Izuku would get into Todoroki's mind, and he would have no choice but to agree in the very end. He would agree to use his fire and ice, and he would prove to become a far more effective hero. Todoroki would actually thank Izuku in the end as well. And once again, the crime rates were drastically lower, to the point where people would feel safe to walk out into town basically with all sorts of expensive jewelry. They could now no longer have to worry about villains popping in and out, trying to take over their bodies, trying to rob them, all of these sort of things. They no longer had to worry about any of this. So now they would see Izuku in a better light now. He would still be kind of scary, but he would also be seen as the #1 hero. And they would accept any and all of his methods because they would prove to be effective in the very end. And they would also be raised in the next generation of heroes to follow in his footsteps. And that's how I will be ending off this video all. Sorry that this took so long to record. Things basically have been kind of loud at my house for the past couple of days, or well, week. So I wasn't really able to record like that. But that's all I have to really say. Remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. King Ty next. Out!